Emily's life looked perfect from the outside. She and Daniel had been married for 5 years, living in a cozy suburban house with a picket fence and a garden Daniel took pride in. He was a successful manager at a logistics firm, while Emily worked part-time as an artist, turning their home into a gallery of warm colors and personal touches. Neighbors often commented on how idyllic their life seemed. Emily's kindness and Daniel's confidence made them a picture-perfect couple. But behind closed doors, Emily carried the weight of growing tension. Daniel, for all his charm, held tightly to certain traditions. He often spoke of his family's pride in keeping the lineage strong, a sentiment passed down from his late father. Emily, though she loved him deeply, felt the unspoken pressure in every word he said about sons carrying the family name. He never outright demanded it, but his disappointment was palpable every time someone mentioned their lack of children, and the topic of daughters was brushed aside with a half-hearted smile. Emily had always dreamed of a family filled with love and laughter. She adored Daniel, but as his expectations became clearer, a shadow began to loom over her happiness. She started questioning if her love alone was enough to meet his rigid ideals. One crisp autumn morning, Emily stood in the bathroom staring at the pregnancy test in her hand. 2 faint pink lines. Her heart raced, a mix of elation and apprehension flooding through her. After years of trying, it had finally happened. She was pregnant. She clutched the test to her chest and whispered a silent prayer, imagining a tiny heartbeat growing inside her. When she told Daniel that evening, his reaction was immediate and jubilant. He picked her up, spinning her around in the living room, his laughter filling the house. "We're going to be parents," he exclaimed. "Finally!" His joy was contagious, and for a fleeting moment, Emily let herself believe everything would be perfect. But as the days passed, Daniel's excitement turned to specifics. He began talking about their child as though he already knew it would be a boy. "A son to carry the family name," he said over dinner one evening, his eyes gleaming. "We'll teach him football. I'll show him how to build things, and he'll be just like his grandfather." Emily smiled weakly, trying to match his enthusiasm, but unease settled in her chest. What if it wasn't a boy? Would Daniel still love their child as much? She began to feel the heavy weight of his unspoken expectations pressing down on her. At her first prenatal appointment, Emily mentioned her family's medical history. The doctor ordered additional tests, and during her next visit, the results were clear. If her baby was male, there was a high chance he could inherit a rare but devastating genetic disorder. Emily's stomach dropped as the doctor explained the risks. She nodded mechanically, clutching her bag tightly as questions swirled in her mind. Walking out of the clinic, Emily's hands trembled. This was no longer about traditions or expectations. It was about protecting the life growing inside her. But how would Daniel, so fixated on the idea of a son, react to this? Her joy now felt like a fragile thread, threatening to unravel at any moment. For days, Emily wrestled with the news. She would sit by the window with her hands resting on her belly, staring at the falling leaves, lost in thought. Each night, Daniel would dream aloud about their future son, his voice filled with so much hope, it was almost unbearable. Emily said nothing about what the doctor had told her. She didn't know how to break the news, and deep down, she feared what his reaction might be. The words of her doctor echoed in her mind. If it's a boy, there's a significant risk he could inherit the condition. It's a hard decision, but there are ways to ensure the baby's health before it's too late. The thought of taking control over something so monumental terrified her, but so did the thought of bringing a child into the world who might suffer endlessly. Late one night, Emily sat alone at the dining table, the house silent except for the faint hum of the refrigerator. Tears streaked her face as she pored over pamphlets and medical reports. Choosing the gender of her baby felt unnatural, almost like playing God, but it wasn't about preference or control. It was about survival, about giving her child the best chance at a healthy, happy life. With trembling hands, she made the decision. She would proceed with the intervention to ensure their baby was a girl, and she would do it alone. The day of her next ultrasound, the technician handed her a printed image. The small, grainy silhouette of her daughter came into view, and Emily felt a rush of emotions: love, relief, and a deep sense of guilt. She smiled faintly, tracing the outline of the tiny body, but her heart felt heavy. She knew she couldn't tell Daniel, not yet, not while he was still dreaming of a son. As she left the clinic, clutching the ultrasound photo to her chest, Emily whispered softly, "I'm doing this for you." Yet even as she said it, the weight of her secret loomed over her like a shadow. One evening, Daniel came home earlier than usual, a rare occurrence that caught Emily off guard. She was in the kitchen preparing dinner, the soft hum of classical music filling the air. On the dining table, she had left a stack of papers, medical reports, receipts, and her latest ultrasound image. She had intended to sort through them after dinner, but in her rush to finish cooking, she'd forgotten they were there. Daniel walked in, his cheerful greeting echoing through the house. But as he approached the table, his gaze fell on the pile of documents. His eyes scanned the pages absent-mindedly until one phrase stopped him cold. "Gender selection procedure approved." "What the hell is this?" His voice, sharp and accusing, cut through the peaceful ambiance. Emily froze, her heart pounding. She turned to find him holding the report, his face contorted with confusion and anger. "Daniel, I can explain," she began, her voice trembling. "Explain?" he barked, waving the paper in the air. "You chose our baby's gender? Without telling me? Without even asking me?" Emily stepped closer, hands outstretched in a placating gesture. "Please, let me explain. It wasn't a choice. It was about health, about making sure our baby would be safe." "Safe?" Daniel interrupted, his voice rising. "You mean you just decided you didn't want a boy? You destroyed our chance to have a son? My son?" "It's not like that," Emily cried, tears welling in her eyes. "The doctor said if the baby was a boy, he might inherit a genetic disorder. I couldn't take that risk, Daniel. I had to protect our child." Daniel's laughter was bitter and cold. "Protect our child? Or protect yourself? Do you even know what you've done? You've robbed me, robbed us of something sacred. A son to carry on my family's name, a son to follow in my footsteps. Do you even understand what this means to me?" Emily felt her knees weaken, but she stood her ground. "I made this decision because I love our baby, because I love you. I couldn't tell you, Daniel. I knew how much you wanted a son, and That's right," Daniel snapped, his words cutting like a blade. You knew, and you went behind my back anyway. What else have you lied about, Emily? How am I supposed to trust you now?" His anger boiled over, and he slammed the report onto the table. "Maybe I was wrong about you," he said coldly, his voice low and venomous. "Maybe you're not the person I thought you were." Emily's tears flowed freely now, but Daniel had already turned away. "Daniel, please," she begged, reaching for him. "Don't do this. Don't walk away." He stopped at the door, his shoulders rigid, his hands clenched into fists. Without looking back, he spat the words that would haunt her for weeks. "If you wanted this baby on your own terms, then maybe you should raise it on your own." And with that, he walked out, leaving Emily standing in the kitchen, shattered and alone. The sound of the front door slamming shut echoed through the house, a final punctuation to the life they once shared. The house felt emptier than it ever had before. Daniel's suitcase was gone, and so was he. The echo of the front door slamming still lingered in Emily's ears as she stood in the same spot where he had left her, numb and motionless. Her swollen belly, a testament to the life growing inside her, felt heavier than ever. She placed a hand over it, her fingers trembling. "It's just us now," she whispered, her voice cracking under the weight of her emotions. The days that followed were a blur of silence and pain. Daniel didn't call, didn't return, didn't even leave a note. Emily spent hours staring at her phone, willing it to buzz with some sign of life from him. But it never did. The man she had loved so deeply, the man she thought would stand by her no matter what, had chosen to leave when she needed him most. Her nights were the worst. Alone in their bed, surrounded by memories of better times, she would cry into her pillow until exhaustion overtook her. She wanted to scream, to beg the universe to rewind time, to undo everything that had led them to this point. But she couldn't. She had to stay strong, for the baby. At her next prenatal appointment, Emily struggled to hold back tears as the doctor asked how she was feeling. "I'm fine," she lied, her voice barely above a whisper. But she wasn't fine. Her heart ached in ways she hadn't thought possible, and the stress was beginning to take its toll on her body. The doctor warned her to avoid emotional strain, cautioning that it could affect the baby's development. That night, Emily sat alone in the nursery she had spent months preparing. The crib stood in the corner, adorned with soft pink bedding and a mobile of tiny stars. She ran her fingers over the delicate fabric, trying to imagine the baby's face, her tiny hands reaching out for comfort. "I'll protect you," Emily said aloud, her voice steady despite the tears streaming down her face. "No matter what happens, I'll protect you." But deep down, she felt the hollow ache of abandonment. The man she had trusted to be her partner, her equal, had walked away. And as much as she wanted to hate him, she couldn't. She still loved him, even as she felt the shards of her broken heart cutting deeper with every passing day. Emily's labor began on a rainy evening, the kind of storm that made everything outside feel distant and surreal. She was alone in the hospital room, clutching the bed rails as waves of pain surged through her body. Nurses came and went, offering reassurances and adjustments to the machines, but Emily couldn't help noticing the absence that loomed like a dark shadow. Daniel wasn't there. The father of her child, the man she once thought would hold her hand through this moment, was nowhere to be found. When Lily finally arrived, crying and tiny and perfect, Emily's tears came in a torrent. She held her daughter to her chest, overwhelmed by a tidal wave of love and grief. Lily's soft cries filled the room, and for a moment the pain of the last few months seemed to fade. "You're here," Emily whispered, stroking Lily's cheek. "You're my everything now." The days after Lily's birth were some of the hardest Emily had ever faced. Returning home with her newborn in her arms, she was met not with celebration, but with the quiet judgment of neighbors and the stinging whispers of extended family. "Poor girl, raising a baby all alone," they said, shaking their heads. "I wonder what she did to drive him away." Emily tried to block out the voices, but the isolation was suffocating. She spent long nights pacing the nursery, rocking Lily to sleep, and whispering to her in the soft glow of the nightlight. "It's just you and me, sweetheart," she would say, her voice thick with emotion. "We don't need anyone else." Despite the challenges, Lily became Emily's anchor. Every tiny milestone, Lily's first smile, her curious eyes following the light, the way her tiny fingers gripped Emily's hand, filled Emily with a renewed sense of purpose. She was exhausted, yes, but every time she looked at her daughter, she felt a spark of strength she didn't know she possessed. Emily poured all her energy into caring for Lily. She learned how to navigate sleepless nights, colic, and the relentless demands of a newborn. Her world shrank, revolving entirely around her daughter, but it was a world filled with moments of profound love. When Lily slept in her arms, Emily would stroke her soft hair and whisper promises into the quiet. "I'll always be here for you, no matter what." In the stillness of those moments, Emily found solace. She didn't need Daniel, or the approval of the neighbors, or even the support of family members who had turned cold. She had Lily, and for now, that was enough. As the months passed, Emily realized she needed to build a stable life for herself and Lily. The little savings she had wouldn't last forever, and she refused to let her daughter grow up without security. So she decided to take a bold step. She opened a small boutique in town, selling handmade crafts and artwork. The shop was modest, tucked away on a quiet street, but it was hers, a reflection of her creativity and determination. Balancing the demands of the shop and caring for Lily wasn't easy. Mornings were spent setting up displays and serving the occasional customer, while Lily napped in a bassinet behind the counter. Afternoons were a whirlwind of feedings, diaper changes, and managing inventory. Some nights, after putting Lily to bed, Emily would stay up late crafting new items to sell. It was exhausting, but it gave her a sense of purpose, a way to move forward. One day, as Emily was rearranging a display of handmade pottery, a familiar voice startled her. "Emily? Is that really you?" She turned to see Michael, an old friend from college. His warm smile and kind eyes brought back memories of simpler times. "Michael, it's been ages," she said, surprised but genuinely happy to see him. Michael, now a freelance designer, was passing through town on a project. They spent hours catching up over coffee in the shop. When Emily shyly admitted how hard it was to juggle everything on her own, Michael immediately offered to help. "I've got some time between projects," he said. "Let me pitch in. Maybe I can watch Lily while you work, or help organize the shop." At first, Emily hesitated, She wasn't used to relying on anyone anymore, but Michael's steady presence soon became invaluable. He was patient with Lily, quick to make her laugh, and his practical advice helped Emily streamline her business. For the first time in months, Emily felt a weight lifting. With Michael's support, life started to feel a little less overwhelming, a little more hopeful. While Emily was finding her footing and rebuilding her life, Daniel's world was crumbling. At first, his decision to leave Emily felt like a declaration of freedom. He convinced himself he was right to walk away, justified in his anger over her betrayal. He moved into a small apartment and started spending time with a woman he'd met at work, Rachel. She was charming and attentive, always affirming his ego and encouraging his lofty dreams. For a while, it felt like a fresh start. But cracks began to show. At work, Daniel's temper and distraction cost him valuable opportunities. His once promising career started to falter as he clashed with colleagues and failed to deliver on important projects. Eventually, the company let him go. With no steady income, bills began piling up. Daniel turned to Rachel for support, but her once sweet demeanor shifted. She became distant, her words cutting and dismissive. It wasn't long before Daniel realized the truth. Rachel had never cared for him the way he thought. She had seen him as an opportunity, a stepping stone. When his financial situation worsened, she walked away without a backward glance, taking with her the remnants of his savings. Alone in his cramped apartment, Daniel found himself haunted by memories of the life he had abandoned. The warmth of his home with Emily, the anticipation of becoming a father, the trust she had once placed in him, they all felt like distant dreams, cruelly out of reach. Sitting in the dim light of his empty living room, surrounded by overdue bills and reminders of his failures, Daniel began to understand the gravity of his mistake. He had walked away from the only people who truly loved him, and now, as the weight of his choices bore down on him, he realized that he might never get them back. The knock at the door came late in the evening, startling Emily as she rocked Lily to sleep in her arms. She glanced at the clock, nearly 10 p.m. Who could be visiting at this hour? Setting Lily gently into her crib, she walked to the door, tightening her cardigan around herself. When she opened it, the sight before her made her breath catch. Daniel stood there, drenched from the drizzle outside, his once proud posture slumped. His eyes were red, rimmed with exhaustion, and his hands trembled as he held them clasped in front of him. "Emily," he said, his voice hoarse, barely above a whisper, "I need to talk to you. Please." Emily's first instinct was to slam the door in his face. Months of loneliness and anger bubbled up inside her, threatening to spill over. "What are you doing here?" she asked coldly, her fingers tightening on the doorframe. Daniel stepped forward, but not into the house. Instead, he sank to his knees on the wet doorstep, his head bowed. "I was wrong," he choked out. "About everything. Leaving you, leaving Lily, it was the biggest mistake of my life." Emily's heart twisted at his words, but she refused to let her guard down. "You don't get to come back here and say that," she said sharply. "Not after what you did. Do you even know what you left us with? The nights I spent crying, the months I've spent picking up the pieces?" Daniel looked up at her, his eyes glistening with tears. "I know I don't deserve forgiveness. I know I failed you and our daughter. But I've lost everything, Emily. My job, my Rachel." He paused, his voice breaking. "She used me, took what little I had left and left me in the gutter. But that's not why I'm here. I'm here because I've realized what I had with you, what I've lost, and I'm begging you, please, let me try to make this right." Emily stood frozen, her emotions battling within her. Part of her wanted to scream at him, to tell him he had no right to come crawling back after abandoning her. But another part, the part that remembered the love they had once shared, hesitated. Finally, she stepped aside. "Come in," she said, her voice steady but cold. "We need to talk. But don't think for a second that this means I've forgiven you." Daniel nodded, wiping his face with the sleeve of his jacket, and stepped inside, soaking the rug beneath him. Emily closed the door, her hands trembling. She didn't know where this conversation would lead, but one thing was clear. It was time to lay everything bare. They sat across from each other in the small living room, a heavy silence filling the space between them. The room, once shared with warmth and laughter, now felt like neutral ground in a battlefield. Daniel's gaze flickered to the crib in the corner where Lily slept, her tiny chest rising and falling in peaceful rhythm. Emily, arms crossed, leaned back in her chair, her expression unreadable. "You said you wanted to make things right," she began, her voice calm but sharp. "Then let's start with the truth. You want to know why I made the decision about Lily?" Daniel nodded slowly. "I do. I need to understand why you kept it from me." Emily took a deep breath, her hands tightening into fists on her lap. "Do you remember when I went for my prenatal checkups? When the doctor asked about my family's medical history?" She looked at him, her eyes searching his for some flicker of memory. He nodded again, confused. "I remember you saying they needed extra tests. I didn't think much of it." "Of course you didn't," she said bitterly, "because you were too busy dreaming about the son you wanted. You never stopped to ask why they were so concerned. But I did." She paused, gathering herself. "The test showed that if the baby was a boy, he would have a high risk of inheriting a genetic disorder from my side of the family. A disorder that could have killed him before he even had a chance to live." Daniel's face fell, his lips parting slightly as if to speak, but no words came. He sat motionless as the weight of her words sank in. "I didn't make the choice for myself, Daniel," Emily continued, her voice trembling now. "I made it for our child. I made it so she could live, so she wouldn't have to suffer, so we wouldn't have to bury a baby before we ever had the chance to know him. And I did it alone because I knew you wouldn't understand." "That's not true," he said weakly, but even as the words left his mouth, he realized how hollow they sounded. Emily leaned forward, her eyes blazing with anger and pain. "Isn't it? You wanted a son so badly that you couldn't see anything else. Do you think I wanted to make that decision? To carry that weight by myself? I had to choose between your pride and our child's life, and I chose her." Tears streamed down Daniel's face as he absorbed her words. "Emily, I didn't know. I didn't. Because you didn't want to know," she interrupted. "You only cared about what you wanted, not what we needed, not what was best for our baby." Daniel buried his face in his hands, his shoulders shaking. "I'm sorry," he whispered, his voice breaking. "I'm so sorry. I was so blind. I don't know how to fix this." Emily's voice softened, but the pain remained. "I don't know if you can," she said quietly. "But you need to understand that Lily is here, healthy and alive, because of what I did. You left us because you felt betrayed, but you never stopped to ask why. Now you know." The silence stretched between them as Daniel sat frozen, consumed by his guilt. He looked toward Lily's crib again, his heart aching at the thought of what could have been. He had dreamed of a son, but he had never considered the cost of that dream, or the strength it took Emily to make the choice she did. Finally, he met Emily's gaze, his eyes filled with remorse. "You're right," he said. "I didn't understand then, but I do now, and I'll spend the rest of my life trying to make up for it, if you'll let me." Daniel's words hung in the air, raw with remorse. "I'm sorry," he repeated, his voice trembling. "For everything. For walking away, for not listening, for not being there when you needed me. I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I swear I'll spend the rest of my life proving I can be better. For you, for Lily." Emily's gaze softened slightly, but the pain in her eyes was unmistakable. "Words are easy, Daniel," she said, her tone calm but laced with hurt. "You left me when I needed you most. You abandoned me and Lily before she even took her first breath. Do you know what that did to me? Do you know how many nights I cried myself to sleep wondering if I'd ever be enough for her, for anyone?" Daniel winced, his hands clenched on his knees. "I do now," he said, his voice barely audible. "I was selfish, blind. I see that now. But please, Emily, give me a chance to make it right. Let me be here for you, for Lily." Before Emily could respond, a knock interrupted their tense conversation. She stood up, brushing past Daniel, and opened the door. There stood Michael, carrying a small bag of groceries and a stuffed toy for Lily. His face lit up when he saw Emily, but the warmth faded slightly when he noticed Daniel sitting in the living room. "Oh," Michael said, glancing between them. "I didn't realize you had company." "It's fine," Emily replied, her voice steady as she stepped aside to let Michael in. "Come in." Daniel's jaw tightened as he watched Michael stride confidently into the room. He noticed how relaxed Emily seemed around him, how Michael instinctively handed her the groceries and placed the toy on the table. The casual intimacy of their interaction made Daniel's stomach churn. Michael turned to Daniel, offering a polite but firm nod. "I'm Michael, a friend of Emily's." Daniel forced a tight smile, but his mind raced with jealousy and fear. He saw the way Michael's presence filled the space he had abandoned, and the realization hit him hard. He wasn't just fighting for Emily's forgiveness. He was fighting to reclaim his family before it was too late. Emily sat on the edge of her bed that night, staring at Lily's crib as the baby slept peacefully. The sound of her soft breathing filled the room, a reminder of the life Emily had fought so hard to protect. But her mind was elsewhere, torn between the man she once loved and the one who had stood by her side when she needed it most. The next morning, she asked Daniel to meet her at the park near their house. The air was crisp, and the golden hues of autumn leaves framed the space where they now stood. Daniel's face was drawn with hope and apprehension, while Emily's expression remained calm, though her hands fidgeted with the strap of the diaper bag. "Thank you for coming," she began, her voice steady. "There are things we need to address, for Lily's sake." Daniel nodded, his throat tight. "Emily, whatever it takes, I'll do it. I'll be better. I'll prove it to you." She sighed, the weight of the decision pressing on her chest. "Daniel, I've thought long and hard about this. I believe you when you say you want to change, and I'm glad you've realized your mistakes. But this isn't just about you and me anymore. It's about what's best for Lily." Daniel opened his mouth to speak, but she held up her hand. "You left us once, and I can't let that happen again. I can't risk Lily growing up with that uncertainty, but she deserves to know her father. She deserves your love, and I won't stand in the way of that." His face fell as the meaning of her words sank in. "You're saying, you don't want me back." Tears welled in Emily's eyes, but she stood firm. "I'm saying that I've moved on. You broke something in me, Daniel, something I don't think can be fixed. But that doesn't mean you can't be part of Lily's life. She deserves to have a father, and I believe you can be that for her." Daniel's shoulders slumped, but he nodded slowly. "I understand," he whispered. "I won't let her down. Or you." Before he could say more, Michael appeared at the edge of the park, carrying a small thermos of coffee and a blanket for Lily. He approached with a gentle smile, his presence calm and grounding. Emily turned to Daniel, her voice soft but firm. "Michael has been there for us when you weren't. He's the reason I've been able to keep going, and I want to give this a chance to see where it leads." Daniel looked at Michael, his jaw tightening briefly, but then he exhaled, nodding in quiet acceptance. "As long as Lily is happy, that's what matters," he said, his voice heavy with regret but also resolve. Emily gave him a faint smile. "That's all any of us want." In the months that followed, Daniel began to rebuild his relationship with Lily, but the process was anything but easy. The weight of his past mistakes clung to him like a shadow, a constant reminder of what he had lost. Emily was true to her word. She allowed him regular visits with their daughter, but their interactions remained formal, distant. The warmth that had once defined their connection was gone, replaced by a polite but unyielding boundary. Every time Daniel walked into Emily's home and saw Michael there, helping with Lily's bottle, reading her a story, or fixing a loose hinge on the kitchen cabinet, he felt the sharp sting of regret. This was the life he had abandoned, and now someone else had stepped in to fill the void he'd left behind. But Daniel didn't let his jealousy show. Instead, he focused on being the best father he could be. At first, Lily was hesitant around him, clinging to Emily or reaching for Michael when she felt uneasy. Daniel's heart broke every time she turned away from him, but he didn't blame her. He knew he had to earn her trust. He began showing up consistently, bringing small gifts, or simply sitting on the floor and playing with her. Over time, Lily warmed to him, her giggles lighting up his days. Those moments were his salvation, proof that he could still be a part of her life. Yet, the ache of losing Emily never left him. Daniel often replayed their conversations in his mind, wishing he had listened to her, supported her when she needed him most. He realized now that Emily's strength and sacrifice were what had held their family together, and he had shattered it with his pride and selfishness. One evening, after a particularly joyful playdate with Lily, Daniel sat alone in his apartment. The walls felt cold, the silence deafening. He stared at a photo he had taken of Lily that afternoon, her toothy smile and bright eyes a mirror of Emily's. He traced her face with his finger, tears stinging his eyes. "I'll always love her," he whispered to himself, "but I'll never deserve her." Though Daniel worked tirelessly to be a present and loving father, the weight of his past choices lingered. He had learned the hard way that some mistakes couldn't be undone, and some losses were permanent. His only solace was knowing that in Lily, he could still leave behind something good, a legacy of love and effort, even if it came too late to save his family. The sunlight streamed through the canopy of trees, casting golden rays onto the garden where Emily and Michael stood, hand in hand. Surrounded by close friends and family, they exchanged vows beneath an arch adorned with white roses and lavender. Emily's face glowed with happiness, her eyes glistening with unshed tears as she looked at the man who had been her rock through the hardest times. Lily, now a bright and bubbly toddler, stood beside them, holding a small bouquet of daisies. She giggled as Michael knelt to her level, pulling her into their embrace as the officiant declared them husband and wife. The crowd erupted into cheers, but for Emily, the only sound that mattered was Lily's laughter and the steady rhythm of Michael's heart as he held her close. The reception was simple, but filled with joy. Emily watched as Michael twirled Lily around the dance floor, her tiny feet bouncing with excitement. For the first time in years, she felt whole. The life she had fought so hard to rebuild was now filled with love and hope, and she knew she had made the right choice. Daniel attended the wedding, seated quietly at the back. Though it hurt to watch Emily with another man, he couldn't deny that Michael made her happy. He spent most of the day playing with Lily, savoring every moment with his daughter. He knew he had lost Emily forever, but seeing her finally at peace brought him a strange sense of closure. As the night drew to a close, Emily stood on the porch of her new home, cradling Lily in her arms. Michael wrapped his arm around her, and they gazed out at the stars together. "We're a family," Michael whispered, his voice filled with warmth, "and I'll never stop fighting to keep us that way." Emily leaned into him, her heart full. "I believe you," she said softly, brushing a kiss onto Lily's forehead. In that moment, Emily realized that the trials she had endured had shaped her into the person she was now, stronger, braver, and more determined than ever to protect the happiness she had found. She had lost much, but in the end, she gained a love that was true and a family that would stand the test of time. As Lily dozed off in her arms, Emily whispered into the night, "Those who give love freely and live with kindness will always find their way to happiness." And for the first time in years, she truly believed it.